I'm Alan Carr from Temple. I have the pleasure of being able to start the first session this afternoon. I'll also have the pleasure of being able to end the afternoon because I'll be chairing the final panel. Before we get actually into the program, there are just a few things I'd like to say on behalf of both the Fox School and Wells Fargo in the way of thank yous. The most important one, of course, is to all of you for being willing to give up a day of your valuable time to be here. We really hope you have found this to be an informative and useful experience. I, for one, am willing to listen to any comments, positive or negative, that you might like to offer us so that as we move this program into the future, we'll be able to do even more to try to serve you who are our audience. In addition to that, I think you're all aware that for any event like this, there are a number of people who never appear on stage, but who have played a huge role in helping it all happen, and I want to just mention a few of those. Some of these, 4 of them, you will or might or already have interacted with, who have been sitting at the registration table. From Wells Fargo, Kristen Ryan, who has been a mainstay of the planning process since the very beginning. Jenny Besser, 2 of our department's own PhD students, Bear Zhang, who interestingly, for those of you who don't know, has been part of the Wells Fargo project and has been so successful at it that Wells Fargo has made him an offer now that he's completed his PhD, and he's going to be moving to them full time. And also Yijian Wang. And one final person whom many of you have interacted with who can't be here today is Summer Khan, who has worked with all of us to make a lot of the arrangements. So I hope you'll join me. I think none of them maybe is in the room at this point. It's hard to see. I think Kristen has gone back outside. But let's give them a vote of thanks even though they're not here. And now I have the pleasure of introducing the panel on university, industry, and government, even though it doesn't say it, collaboration. We have 4 really distinguished people here. I'm going to introduce all of them and then turn it over to the moderator, who is Chris Harvey from Wells Fargo. Chris and I have been working together now for a couple of years, and he has probably found it challenging having to deal with me, but I can say it's been a total pleasure dealing with Chris. Our real panelists, if you will, are 3 distinguished people, largely but not entirely with university backgrounds and experience. In the order you're going to hear them, David Banks, who is a professor in the Department of Statistical Science at Duke, who is on your far left, I guess. David has experience both in universities and outside universities and is one of the true polymaths in today's world. So I think David, who will also be on the final panel, will have some interesting things. Next is Jim Rosenberger, who is Emeritus Professor of Statistics at Penn State, longtime chair of the department at Penn State, and has spent the past 5 years of his life as director of NISS, trying to undo the damage that I did during the time that I was the director of NISS. And finally, and a new acquaintance of mine, but one whom I've come to really admire and enjoy working with, is Recai Yucel, who is a biostatistician in the Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at Temple. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way.
So, David, if I could just start very quickly. So the layout will be, David will start and we'll work our way down. Once David's done showing his slides, we'll have a couple questions. Carrie, if you have a question, I'll let you ask one. But instead, I prefer to wait until the end until we answer the bigger questions. So without further ado, David, if you will.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I feel stunningly fortunate in my career on many different aspects, but one particularly nice one has to do with my industry collaborations. 17 years ago, I started, well, one of my friends is Deepak Agarwal. Back then, he was working for Yahoo. He invited me to come out and do some consulting with Yahoo, and he got me interested in computational advertising. And the world has moved on since then. He got me started on computational advertising. I organized a workshop on computational advertising at the Statistical and Applied Mathematical Sciences Institute. I wound up teaching a course on machine learning, and one of the students in that course was Michael Ells. Michael Ells was the 6th hire at MaxPoint Interactive. And MaxPoint Interactive was a startup in the Research Triangle in North Carolina. It went on to have an IPO, and then eventually got bought by Velasys. And Michael, being the 6th hire, said we needed some statisticians, so he brought me in, and I wound up working with them. And we've had a number of papers, a number of collaborations, a number of graduate students who are funded by MaxPoint or now Velasys who have come through. So I feel very fortunate about how that has all worked out. The industry academic collaboration, I think, is an incredibly important tool. And in fact, I am now telling all of my PhD students, seriously consider going into information technology as a career. If you go into IT, you will have access to data that I, as an academic, will never see. You'll have access to computing power that I, as an academic, will never see. And Google will pay you about $500,000 a year, which I will never see. So you put it all together, and there are lots of good reasons to go into these industry collaborations. My eyes aren't good enough to see the screen down there, so I'm going to turn over here. One thing that my PhD student, Tim Au, did for MaxPoint was to significantly improve their bidding algorithm. They're a computational advertising service. They bid on ads. They try and show impressions to people or click-throughs or whatever the metric is. Different metrics for different topics. But Tim Au was supported by them for 2 summers, and during that time, he developed a whole new style of bidding that significantly enhanced their revenue. Computational advertising is an important modern industry, and it's a very new industry. But by 2025, it'll be worth $982 billion. Remarkably, old statistical ideas are relevant. Google performs several thousand experiments a year. These are designed experiments. They're multi-armed bandit problems. Google famously experimented with 47 different shades of blue for their hyperlinks. And there are new problems that arise because I can be exposed to one arm of the experiment on my laptop, a different arm of the experiment on my cell phone, and classical experimental design never imagined that the same experimental unit might receive 2 different levels of the same factor in a trial. And so we have a novel problem. Similarly, my wife might see an ad for a vacation in Italy, and she'll tell me to make arrangements for that vacation. That's a contamination effect. Classical experimental design doesn't really seriously deal with the possibility that the ad will have an effect on somebody other than the person who saw the ad. So we need to build out a social network model for experimental design. Alex Volfovsky, where are you, Alex? Alex is skipped off. He does that. People like Alex are working to try and understand experimental design in the context of network effects. Another issue. that's novel. We've been doing process control for a long time. If Domino's puts out an advertisement for pizza, over time, that ad will become stale and people will stop clicking on it. So Domino's will monitor the click-through rate on that ad to see if things are changing. Additionally, if Pizza Hut puts out an ad that is way better than Domino's, there'll be not drift, but a shift. The Pizza Hut ad will suddenly getting click-throughs that Domino's wouldn't have. So we want to monitor both for shifts and drifts in advertising success in the computational advertising space. But it's got a novel component. It's adversarial. If Domino's has a really good ad, Pizza Hut is going to go to its creatives and say, please up our game. Give us a new ad that's even better than what Domino's has. So there's an adversarial component to process control that we have not seen previously in our research. Here is a image that shows the 20 different interactions that have to happen when you have an online ad. And these interactions all take place within 10 milliseconds. So it's an incredibly fertile space. There's a whole batch of handshakes that have to occur in order for an online ad to take place. And I'm not going to try and describe what all those interactions are, but basically when your browser types in some keyword like pizza, a whole batch of decisions happen. One is, does Google think that you're in a location at a time when showing you a pizza ad is actually effective? If it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you're probably not out there trying to buy a pizza. So they're probably not going to bid on your ad. If you are at lunchtime and you're typing in pizza, then yes, they will bid a lot for your eyeballs to see that ad. There are a batch of handshakes that take place and before the creative content is actually displayed on your screen. And this process is evolving. It used to be that nearly all of the ads were second price auctions. And now the computational advertising companies have decided that first price auctions give them a bit of an edge. Now the revenue equivalence theorem says that shouldn't matter, but in fact, psychologically it does. And so we are moving towards all first price auctions in the advertising space. I am particularly enthusiastic about recommender systems. I've got a paper in JASA coming out very shortly on recommender systems. Recommender systems are the workhorse of computational advertising. They decide whether or not to show you an ad or not. Is this a good person to show you an ad? And I will add that the internet browsers know a lot about you. They know your approximate age, your marital status, your income level, where you live, and many other things. So you're getting very personalized recommendations when you type in keywords. And one aspect of computational advertising is that it is data engineering. Later on today, we're going to have a conversation about data science and machine learning and stuff like that. And my view is that nowadays, almost all of our graduate students are going to become data engineers. If you are looking at a distant sun in order to determine whether or not there is a wobble that can be explained by an extrasolar planet, then you're doing data science. If you're looking at lots of high-energy particle physics to determine whether or not the Higgs boson exists, then you're doing data science. But if you're taking a ton of data, using smart algorithms, and helping Uber pre-position its cars 0.5% better in Seattle, then you're doing data engineering. And there's no theorem there, there's no science there, but you are making the world better. And that's more like engineering than it is science. So in the context of recommender systems, there are two theories. There's collaborative filtering and there's content-based filtering. And those are the ideas that we start with. But as data engineers, we realize that recommending a Western is different from recommending a science fiction book. And Amazon knows this. And so they have slightly different versions of their recommender systems, depending on whether or not you are somebody who likes Western novels or somebody who likes science fiction. And so all of these general theories of recommender systems are getting specialized and tailored to very specific solutions. I've seen 2.5 revolutions, theoretically, in my career, and I don't think I'm going to see another one. I think what we're going to see is the world moving towards bespoke, hand-fit solutions that specifically addressed very niche problems. So we want to have a methodological revolution that allows us to hand-fit solutions to specific problems rather than coming up with general theory, general theorems, and so forth. Okay, so I've said most of what's on here. Collaborative filtering looks for people whose tastes are similar to yours, and then things that they like will be recommended to you. Content-based filtering is when they learn what tags you like, and then will recommend whatever movies or books or whatever correspond to those tags. Those are the two principal procedures, but in practice, everything now is some sort of hybrid system that draws upon both of those and many other factors. I am fascinated by active recommender systems. Right now, when I go onto Amazon and start looking for a book, it will say, people like you who have purchased these books also liked these books. That's passive. If a friend asks you to recommend a book, you immediately ask them, well, what types of books do you enjoy reading? That's an active recommender system. And so what we need to do is build out a system of questions that we could ask. And this poses novel problems in statistics. For example, it may be that the best question is, on the whole, do you like these 200 books more than you like these 150 books? And I cognitively cannot process this. So there needs to be a complexity penalty on how hard the questions are you're asking. And I don't think you can go much deeper than 3 levels of conditions. Do you like science fiction written by Australians that is humorous? And that's about as much as I can factor into a yes or no response. Additionally, it may be that, in order to learn at the most rapid rate, Amazon wants to ask me questions about books that I have a 50-50 chance of saying yes or no to, according to Amazon's model of my personal behavior. And it may be that the very best question that it asks first has a 50-50 chance of me saying yes or no. But underneath that, the next 4 questions are all 90-10 splits. So Amazon will learn very slowly from those next 4 questions. Instead, what we need to do is ask a 60-40 question if it has a lot of 60-40 splits underneath that. And that's a novel optimization problem. I have never seen that problem addressed in the operations research literature at all. But as statisticians, as Bayesians, I can frame that problem, and I have a graduate student who's working on that. So trying to figure out what is the best sequence of questions to ask is an example of a new problem that has arisen because of this interaction with the computational advertising world. We'll probably be talking about ChatGPT later on today, but I will add that it is totally transformative. Sentiment analysis has a huge role to play in that, and I think that's going to be an important thing for us to think about. Okay, I have reached the last of my slides, but I still have time on the clock, so let me expatiate. Working with industry has been remarkably fortunate for me. It has been a durable process that's lasted 17 years. Well, no, longer. I have many interactions with industry. Some have been with legal consulting, some of it been with other things. The computational advertising world is one that I think is terribly important. There's an old XKCD comic. Are people cool enough to know XKCD? Yes, good, okay, great, yes. There's an XKCD comic in which they said, what will happen when our spam filters are so good that they only send us relevant information that we care about and only advertise things that we want to buy? And the guy in the hat says, mission fucking accomplished. And that's really where I think computational advertising is going. It is getting so much better. Years ago, I bought a pair of shoes online. And for the next 6 weeks, I was spammed with advertisements for shoes. But I'm a guy. I bought a pair of shoes. I don't need another pair of shoes. I'm done. And now they have gotten smart enough that I don't get ads for shoes until about 9 months after I purchase a pair. So there's a lag built in. They have learned computational advertising is becoming very user-friendly. And I think this is a great step forward for us all. So I am out of time. I'll turn it over to Jim, but thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. Thank you for that, and thank you to the organizers of this. This is the first data science conference I've attended here at Temple, and thanks especially to Wells Fargo for their sponsoring of this event. And Alan, wherever you are, thank you for the invitation. There we go, back there. So I am as mentioned, professor emeritus in statistics from Penn State. I've spent most of my career there. 5 years ago, I took a position at NISS, National Institute of Statistical Science, which Alan directed for many, many years. Very briefly, I, at Penn State, ran the statistical consulting, and I put in their collaboration center for many years before being department chair. I was involved with some Minitab software development back in those days when statistical computing was still maybe in its infancy. And one of the accomplishments during that period of my life was starting our online applied statistics program, which was, well, let me just say, when we launched the idea, it was early enough that the marketing folks thought there's really no market for statistics education online. They decided not to fund us because they couldn't find the market. Well, we decided to go ahead anyway, and as you know, the market for statistical tools is everywhere, and that's what we found. People from all disciplines were signing up for our courses because at that point there weren't as many options as there are now. For 2 years, I spent at NSF back in the turn of this century, and there encountered the phenomenon that, again, statistics was needed in every discipline, but the way NSF was organized and the way disciplines were organized, it wasn't exactly welcomed. And my role during that time was working with many of the other disciplines, biology, computer science, and the term biocomplexity was invented during that period. And the role that I played was bringing those various folks around the table and expanding the notion of mathematical sciences to definitely include statistical sciences, and to make it clear that that needed to involve the domain sciences. Well, as the world evolved, data science today is exactly a team effort. It needs computation, it needs statistics, it needs domain information as part of the team. And so then, the last 5 years, I joined the National Institute of Statistical Science, which I was affiliated with before that, but as director. And our mission at the National Institute of Statistical Science has been cross-disciplinary research from the beginning. It began over 30 years ago at the early 90s. And its initial mission was to develop postdocs who worked in the real world with real applications. And that was back when many statistics faculty members took a job right after their graduate training. They didn't do a postdoc. That has changed in the meantime, partly because of the success, I think, of NISS in showing that putting statisticians in other domains provided the kind of training that helped them tackle statistical methodology issues from a problem perspective. And that's continued to this day. What I thought I would do, we were asked to talk about collaboration with industry or government. And so I just thought I'd talk about a couple of issues that we've worked at NISS, at the National Institute of Statistical Science. We provide researchers, postdocs, and research associates for government agencies. And one most successful program has been with the National Agriculture Statistical Service. There, we have a team of folks working with the researchers in the Department of Agriculture to develop statistical methodology for the challenges that they face today. And as in many government research efforts, they're trying to get good estimates of some quantity, whether it be financial or agricultural or even anything to do with the general population with the census. And so we're looking at models and procedures that take traditional data, survey data, census data, but then add to that other administrative, as on the slide, in terms of agriculture, estimates of acres planted, which has to do with the price of commodities, and then estimates and predictions of future yield, depending on weather and number of acres planted, et cetera. Very, very important numbers for the market. And I think the key thing I want to say about that is not only do they publish those numbers, but they have to publish measures of uncertainty. And that's true of almost every estimate or prediction that's made. Unless you can provide a good estimate of uncertainty, then the viewer, the user of that data, doesn't really know how reliable it is. So the team develops these methods from historical data, checks it with the current data, and then when the models are tested, validated, and accepted, then they become part of the regular production of these numbers, year in, year out. But they're constantly changing. Another aspect of agricultural data that is very much like the general census data is you need to protect the privacy of the people who provide the data. If you don't, they won't answer the questions. And of course, that's a constant problem anyway. So disclosure limitations is very important. Statistical disclosure limitations team was created in the department to look at how to protect the privacy of the data so that it can be released. One other area that we were working in, I'll just mention, is with the Department of Education, and that is providing expert panels to review their methodology to make sure it's it's worthy, it's valid. And one recent project, just I'll mention, there are a number of other projects, but one was to estimate the educational facility inventory and using whatever data was available. And you can't, of course, travel to every location. So they were using satellite imagery to correlate with other information in the database to validate the statistical reports. One other area I'll mention, and that is working with industry. So what I was just talking about was with government agencies, but in my years of experience, I have worked with a number of companies. I will also mention, as David did, some of the more fun consulting I've done is actually on legal issues, because of course, it's kind of a game, the legal system. And so you're working for hopefully the right side of the case, and I've always tried to do that. But at that point, then you're working to win the belief of the judge that your side is right. So one thing I've done recently is working with a small women-owned company. So this was collaborating with several people in the company, but mostly my input has been on designing the trial and helping to decide, how do you show a new device is no worse than the current thing, but it's better in some other ways, maybe fewer side effects or less expensive. And so you always have to design the study to improve the accuracy and reduce the bias. And so many techniques exist for that. Those who've had statistical design of experiments training know what that is, and it comes up in almost every study. But when you can design the study, if not, other areas apply. And one other recent experiment was using design of experiments to optimize the selection of optimal factors in a response surface design. So finding an iterative path from current practice to a new level is always an interesting process. I think that may be the end of my slides, so I don't think I'll try to fill the rest of my space unless, I will say though, I continue to believe that the role that statisticians have played and continue to play, and is very important, is providing the level of uncertainty with the estimates that are given. In the financial world, maybe having a profit is one outcome. But if you're trying to convince someone of your result, being honest about the uncertainty in your number and explaining what that means, and being able to look at the upper and lower limits and what impact that may have, is how you buy credibility, I think, with whoever is receiving your estimates. All right, I think I'll step down there. Thank you.
Well, my presentation is going to be even shorter than that, because first of all, I'm a substitute. So I was asked to participate in this session last minute, but it's a great honor to be here with such distinguished speakers and attendees. So I've been at Temple. This is my 4th year. I'm just entering 4th year, and this is my 2nd time in this conference. Truly amazing, the level of complexity that's presented here. So what I want to talk about is very simple. I don't even know how this is relevant, but I think I'm going to switch a little bit of gears and talk about kind of very basic statistical problems that I was asked to consult on. I'm just going to present a couple examples and focus on one, which is this project that I was asked to be involved for New York City Department of Health before I joined Temple, and this evolved a lot since I joined, or since I was involved. So this project, what it did was we developed a whole set of R routines that made up the computational background of this online tool that allowed stakeholders to assess a bunch of estimates and understand the like aspects of population's health. And I'll explain what data sets it used. Another example that I will not go in, and a couple more examples actually. One of them is independent validation of this diagnostic tool for pharma company. And I'll talk about some takeaway lessons, and I think we're going to talk in the greater discussion various aspects of such examples of academia and industry and government collaborations and consulting. So this example, as I indicated, it develops a tool that's going to underlie the computation for this online software. It's called Epicuri. It basically allows people to get these estimates of various health indicators as measured by various surveys. So like community health survey or health and nutrition survey, these are all part of surveys that's developed by National Center for Health Statistics, but that pertains to population of New York City. So these are survey-based estimates that we developed, but we also did a lot more on statistical analysis of administrative data that I can dig deep on a little bit later. So the specific task was to really integrate a bunch of R routines to obtain design-based estimates, and that works with Tableau, and we developed this online kind of R-Shiny type tools for data analytics and visualization. So that really made up some of the underlying Epicuri platform. It's really cool, actually, if you want to look at some of the things like prevalence of diabetes or their composition in relevant populations. You can actually go easily assess that in this Epicuri platform. So this it was easy, statistically speaking, but it wasn't easy at times to convince the Department of Health individuals that it's okay to use these things, because they were used to these other SAS-SUDAN type of estimates, which is available in limited sense for various data sets. So we had to go through a lot of kind of benchmarking process or quality control to convince them with all kinds of combinations of estimates this passed the test. In times, it didn't. And it didn't because of the various complexities that were addressed differently in different software platforms, such as like how it handled missing data or how it approximated certain variance estimates of the underlying phenomenon. So that part was quite painful. So some of the takeaway lessons that I learned individually from this was kind of overcoming this suspicion on the validity of the new routines or methods or software. So my PhD advisor, Joe Schaefer, he was at Penn State, and then he went to Census Bureau as a scientist. And one time he told us that in one of the gatherings like this, he said that one of the most difficult things is to convince government statisticians or government workers for a new thing, because they may be liable for any negative consequences. So this was a case in this scenario, definitely. It was very difficult to convince them to switch software platforms from one to another one. And this becomes even more complex and difficult as we try to address complications such as missing data or design considerations or causal inference, for example. And so in those cases, I think our job is to really provide clear and objective communication with the relevant parties. As we curate administrative data, such as electronic health records or other administrative data sets, this problem actually becomes even more involved. So we have a lot more challenges that we need to address in such consulting projects. And I'm going to conclude right here. And
That's perfect.
questions, there is one. Thanks.
Thank you. So before we changed up the dynamic, before David dropped the F-bomb, we were gonna interrupt each other and talk and critique what was going on. I want to start a little bit also because David was on a roll and I didn't want to stop him. But I thought the presentation was really interesting, and the thing that's most interesting to me is you found a source or a subject matter that is highly applicable to statistics. Digital advertising, you have volumes of data. You have real-time data. You have metrics, whether it's income levels or age and so on and so forth. It's prime. And then you have that feedback mechanism, which is, did this work, did this not work, right? One of the things that I've seen, and correct me if I'm wrong, so the way you got there was it was a former student.
Yes.
So when I look out at the broader landscape, I look at healthcare and legal as two very inefficient areas, and areas that could use statistics and could benefit greatly. You're beginning to see that, but at a slow pace. One question I have for you is, how do you choose your collaborations, right? What it sounded like is your student came to you and you thought, okay, this is a great idea, but how proactive are you? How often do you look for a certain inefficient market, or do you say, hey, this market could really use my expertise, let me go out and find somebody? And how much trouble do you have finding or getting somebody for that quote unquote buy-in?
I am totally sluggish about that. I have people come to my office and they say, David, would you care to have a cup of coffee and talk about a problem?
Right.
And I always say yes, because I like coffee. And sometimes that evolves into a long-standing research commitment, and sometimes it sputters out and dies. But you still get coffee.
Still get coffee.
And my advice to the young people in the room is say yes to everything. You have enormous capacity. You have no idea how much you can do. And if you let 1,000 flowers, or if you plant 1,000 seeds, some of them will flower.
Okay. One more thing, and this gets a little bit maybe uncomfortable. So if you do your job very well, then people will buy, whether it's a pizza or a pair of shoes. And you referenced this a little bit, hey, I bought a pair of shoes, and then every day I was getting, and they realized, and there's a feedback mechanism in 9 months. But do you worry about the overconsumption, and if you do your job correctly, that perhaps you're feeding into some of the overconsumption that we're seeing in the country, or that never crosses the mind?
It never crosses my mind.
Okay. All right. Now, this is a bigger, broader question for everyone, right? Do you worry the environment that we're seeing on campus has changed dramatically over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years? How does that environment affect your selection of different products or projects? And then if you would answer that first, and the second question in the same vein, right, you're out there in the broader world. You have a reputation, right? How much does working, whether with the federal government, the defense industry, with a certain product, really come into the thought process? Or do you look at things and just say, hey, I'm objective, everyone will think about me as objective, I don't have to worry about some of the shenanigans or the name calling and things of that such, or being quote unquote canceled? How does the environment, or today's environment on campus, and just the broader environment about pushback really influence your selection, if at all? And this is for everyone.
Jim, you look like you wanted to say something.
I was going to say, hold that question, because I think we could talk about it for a long time. And I'm going to come back to the previous question, but
Yeah, please.
not to divert. David said he doesn't worry about that. I worry about that. I think advertising has become a huge issue, and I think it's an ethical issue. And the example, shoes are fine, the advertisement for shoes, but you know, half of our country lives paycheck to paycheck because
Right.
the capitalistic system and the marketing system has been so effective, in my opinion. And I guess where I see the ethics coming in is what I see on television mostly, not so much on digital advertising, and that is advertisements for pharmaceutical prescription drugs. It's illegal in Europe. Here, we have it going on all the time, and are we healthier than Europeans? Anyway, I think there are issues to be discussed there with advertising. I'm not sure at what level it should be
Well,
discussed.
this is a bigger question. We can't get this done in 5 minutes, but let me just ask, do you think there should be more regulation along those lines? And we're looking at Facebook. Meta is now being sued for some of their activity. And if you look at Uber, and if you look at Facebook, and if you look at my son and his phone, these things are very highly addictive. These things are designed to be highly addictive, right, to young kids. Like when I was younger, they would advertise sugared cereal, and that was fine. And then we realized, maybe that's not so fine. But now we're dealing with something very, very different. And you're right, you can see that, again, if you do your job well, in some cases, you're preying on maybe some people's weaknesses, or maybe some psychological issues that there could be an ethical issue there, perhaps. It really depends on. So do you think there should be some type of regulation, or is this just part of the broader discussion that we need to talk about and need to understand? Jim,
The world should be more ethical. The issues that you raise are, I think, deeper than advertising. They have to do with fundamental inequities in our economy. We're looking at potentially huge dislocations economically as autonomous vehicles, large language systems, various other things take charge. You can now eliminate a checkout clerk at a grocery store. Amazon has stores where you just wheel your stuff out and it's automatically debited from your credit card. The consequences of this are going to be very unfair to lots of people, but that's not the conversation that we should be having on this stage. It's a bigger conversation.
Yeah, it's definitely a bigger conversation.
I think another,
Please, yeah.
like when when companies develop drugs, they go through very, very strong and comprehensive review process, and we are involved in their data analysis, and our analysis were repeated, and so very highly regulated. But that doesn't exist anywhere else anymore in terms of digital advertising and other places like that, where statistics might play a role in making like certain populations vulnerable. So I'm not sure how that's going to be, but I think that we need to talk about that in terms of how statistical science will play a role in other fields.
Okay, perfect.
Actually, I would like to argue a little bit with that, because the FDA does not actually apply what I consider to be statistics. By regulation, it is required to decide if a drug is effective and safe. It's not allowed to think about the cost-benefit analysis. It's not allowed to think about the expected utility. And I think that's a terrible deficit, because it leads to very poor choices in terms of investment in public health.
Right.
All right, Jim, I'm going to put you back on the spot, because you had talked about you work with legal, and I think legal, again, is an area that statistics, whether it's, but one of the things I'm surprised at is that you have a lot of public information. You have a lot of judges making a lot of decisions. Judges often get promoted not because they're good or they're making the right decisions, but because they, in my experience, in my understanding, because they get things through the system. In other words, they don't have trials, they just force people to make decisions, okay? So I think there's probably at some point the ability for some statistical muckraker to come in and shed some light on some things, right? About tendencies of certain judges, biases of certain judges, but that's a digression. The question I have is, you talked about a jury, right? And so you're doing something a little bit different. And a jury, you can put the facts in front of a jury, right? But the jury may not come to the right decision. So as a statistician, you can find other factors that influence the jury, and you may bias them that way. And again, you're probably biasing toward, as you point out, I work with good, not evil, right? And you want to bias them and get them to that objective function. But that, if you're successful at that, you can flip that side and turn that around a little bit. So how do you deal with that issue, and how should the broader industry think about that as well?
Well, I guess one thing I would say is I think judges need training in understanding the uncertainty that statistics provides the framework for. Even, hypothesis testing provides a framework. But cases get very difficult. One that I enjoyed participating in had to do with measuring blood alcohol level for someone that was accused of a drunk driving accident. And the current state of law that was affecting that was based on some pretty not accurate methodology. And so my participation, convinced the judge that the proper application of the uncertainty in these measurements was something that should be taken into consideration. And it actually reversed a previous precedent that had been, I think, standing for maybe 2 decades. Of course, there's a gray area everywhere. Finding the right sweet spot between, false positive, false negative is an ongoing challenge. I think we need to do the best we can and do our part, but the system is set up in such a way that it's a contest, and the jury or the judge has to make the decision based on the evidence that's presented.
So this is, please, David.
I also do legal consulting, and my ethical evolution is ongoing. The city of Baltimore hired me to help them prepare a defense in the Freddie Gray killing that occurred. And I thought about it, but I decided that yes, it was probably a good thing to do. It was appropriate to deliver a statistical analysis to understand which precincts in Baltimore had problems and which precincts didn't. Also, the U.S. Department of Justice's case against Baltimore, I thought, was very flawed. They were making statements that were not correct. So there was a whole issue with respect to just correcting other people's mistakes. I've stopped working on, Las Vegas has a whole batch of problems with respect to traffic accidents, and I've stopped working on those. I just never felt comfortable with that. Nonetheless, I do generally think that as a matter of propriety, both sides deserve the best statistical arguments that they can get. And in the same way that a lawyer will defend their client, I think as a statistician, I will work for my employer whether or not I think they are ethically appropriate or inappropriate.
Okay. So then I do want to ask a lighter question, but I want to get back to working with government, working with industry. And the lighter question is for Jim. So PSU, Penn State, has a pretty good football team. Did they ever come to you and say, hey, this Moneyball stuff, can you help us out with this? Or did anyone in the administration ever say, hey, we have students that apply here, maybe we should be more proactive in finding some of these kids that would do quite well here. You can figure out what factors they are, you can find those kids, and then we can have a better outreach program and hence a better student body. Any of that ever happened to you? Or?
Never in my experience at Penn State, but if you think that would move them from, ranked 9 up 5 or 1, I'm guessing they would put money into it.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, where we interacted with them was providing tutoring for students who needed it, and some of those were the
Not a surprise. Okay.
football players.
All right, so the bigger question is, what goes into the decision, and what do you like better, working with government entities or with private practice, with companies in the capital markets? Is there, or do you like them both, and what are some of the risks and some of the benefits?
As a professional, if the problem is interesting, stimulating, then that is a big part of the decision. What I've recognized recently, working with government versus some private companies, industry, is with government, if there's time, and they do allocate time, they're encouraged, the professionals are encouraged to publish their results. So whatever the government does, unless it's the dark side or part of, maybe the Department of Defense, or, they want to publish, they want it published. And so that's good for the careers of the people working, and it's also good for the science. It gets published. That's a problem with working with companies. You sign a non-disclosure agreement. Even though the methodology you're working on, they would be happy, and they would give you permission to publish it, as long as there's no leakage of some proprietary information. So that's kind of a barrier that needs to be overcome working with companies. But if they're, reasonable, and they usually are, you can get beyond that also.
Okay.
So by sticking, by not revealing trade secrets, but sticking with the methodology.
Okay. Well, John, you work with government and healthcare. What have been some of the issues? So you were talking about, if I remember correctly, buy-ins and getting people to being an agent of change, right? So one, just on the bigger question of whether working with the government or working with private practice, some of the trials and tribulations. And two, once you come to your decision, you realize we have a better solution. You're right, sometimes it's very difficult to get people to buy in. How do you get that done? How you've been successful doing that?
I think the communication is the key. So just like when you write a paper, you have to convince the underlying community by way of convincing the reviewers. It's the same thing in government, I think. I think they are open to the new ideas as long as, it's objective and you present them this, scientific evidence. My experience, so if you make that argument, that makes life much easier for both parties. But also, just like Jim said, they are open to advancing the science by way of publications a bit more than the industry. So it's difficult, but you have to show it. I mean, when we write papers, we develop the methods, and we then do the simulation, like previous speakers said, and then demonstrate data applications just like that with the government. If you do that, I think there's nothing that says they are not going to accept it. I think major concern for their part is liability, whether or not at the end of the day they are going to be, getting some negative points or not.
I have a question. It'll be awkward, and I'm not sure I'll get this right. But do you ever work with a government entity and they're using you for some reason for political reasons? Hey, we're working with Temple University or such a university, and whatever result they come out with is the best one. And have you ever had any sort of pressure or influence to come out with a certain decision or answer? And this is for everybody.
I am the former chief statistician at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and I did an analysis that showed that drivers who were over 75 had more accidents per mile driven than teenage drivers. Okay. Sent a memo up the food chain to the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, and the answer came back, no, we will not release this. One reason is that the AARP votes. All the retired people vote. Teenagers do not vote. And that was, I think, one subtext there. Another issue was that all their messaging for many decades had been that teenage drivers are unsafe, and they needed graduated licensure, they needed supervision, they needed all sorts of special protections. And they felt that if this news came out, that would undermine their pitch. So yeah, occasionally in government, things get distorted.
Okay, well, let me ask you this then. So you could work with an insurance company, and you could show that an insurance company that maybe you want to charge a higher premium for this set of the population versus that set of the population. And typically teenagers, having had some teenage sons, they get charged more for auto insurance, right? What complications do you run into having that knowledge and then bringing that knowledge into the public sector, private sector, excuse me?
That is delightful. It's interesting.
No one's ever said any of my questions are delightful, so thank you for that.
Oh, well, of course. No, this is something I have thought about. One issue is that old people have more accidents per mile driven, but old people only drive to the grocery store or church when the weather is good between the 10 o'clock and noon, or between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Whereas teenagers, they drive all the time. They drive when they're drunk. They drive when they're high. They drive while they're conceiving children. They are crazy. And so if your daughter and your mother are going to do a long drive to Florida, hand the keys to your daughter, because she is per mile better than your mother is. So if you're an insurance company, teens total more cars. Old people don't. So although the old people are more risky, they are actually financially less expensive.
Yeah.
So it depends on what your perspective is, whom you're insuring.
I should have known the answer to that, because my grandmother only drove to church with the blinker on the whole way and back, and that's all she ever drove. I have a couple more questions, but we have a few more minutes, and maybe I'll just turn it over to the audience. I'll take a couple of questions from the audience, and then I'll come back to a few of my questions. So I think the gentleman in the back, and Ed, I'm sure you have a question. I know you do. But Alan's beating you to the punch.
I promised Chris in advance I'd be his shill in the audience. But I'd like to really ask any of the three panelists to comment specifically on the role of students in university, industry, or government collaborations. Some of what I've seen can be very beneficial to students, but it doesn't necessarily yield a dissertation topic. So what's the right way to prevent students, if I would use extreme language, from being pawns in this process?
To being what?
Pawns.
Pawns. Okay. Well, let me just say, I think getting them involved with real world problems as early as possible is the best way to get their attention that the discipline we're in, although students are pouring into data science because of the press and because people like David advertise the salaries that Google pays. But people are aware of that. But getting them involved, at the point where they're just developing their skills provides great incentive for them to continue down that path. Getting a diverse group of students involved in that continues to be a challenge, but yeah, we should continue to work on it.
I just want, yeah, that's a really good point. In my previous university, SUNY Albany, State University of New York at Albany, our department, School of Public Health, was a joint venture with the Department of Health, which meant that a lot of students were naturally funded by Department of Health on various projects, and that worked amazingly. So every single student was matched with the project, whatever the subject area is. And my PhD students ended up going to amazing places because of that experience, not because of what they gained with me. So that was just unbelievable. I think having them experience with real world applications is really important, because we can't teach them in grad school, what they learn through those experiences.
And maybe if I could just build on that, what is the right cadence, right? Because if I think about a university, right, you always want to bring in fresh ideas and innovation, right? And so what you want to do is you want your students to go out and then come back, right, and teach for a bit. But you don't see that so often, right? Often you'll see a professor get tenure, stay there for a long time. He or she will have students, the students will go out, they'll sometimes bring back ideas, but is there a better way to bring those ideas back into the university? And is there a better way to start accepting people with real world experience and have a greater transfer? And maybe I'm wrong here, maybe you think that you're already doing that, and I just don't see it.
That's such a stereotype. I don't think that's the way
and maybe I'm
professors
wrong.
work at all.
Right.
We're opportunistic. We are sort of greedy and short-sighted and myopic, and we take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of us. And sometimes the payoff is great, and sometimes it burns out and nothing matters.
Please.
We encourage as many students as possible to take internships.
Right.
So that gets them out into some area of application. They bring that back, and that informs them in terms of their own research many times. But I will also say in the last decade, there's been a sharp increase in the number of universities hiring people from industry with real experience. They're sometimes called a professor of practice or something like that, rather than purely academic. That's been great for diversifying the teaching faculty in a university.
Okay.
I see that happening at a lot of places.
Right. We're going to go to the studio audience in a second, but one more thing. Where's the right balance between doing consulting and working with outside firms and writing academic papers? And have you ever been called, I highly doubt this has ever happened, but has anyone ever called you a sellout or for working with so on and so forth? Or you get a black mark for doing it? Or I'm sure, David, you've been called a sellout a number of times.
Yeah, on a regular basis. I have people on the panel here. The balance depends on where you are in your career. When you're an old guy like me, sell out all the time, doesn't matter. When you're a young guy trying to get tenure, then you need to publish a lot of papers. And different people have different comfort levels with how they spend their time. I have friends who like to prove theorems about local asymptotic minimaxity. I have no idea why, but that's what they want to do. I have other friends who want to go out and have an impact in the world. And some of them are faculty, and some of them go off to industry. So
I have retired colleagues who are still proving theorems in retirement. You're right. But the system has built in most places that a day a week you can consult or work outside the academic setting. You can call that Saturday or whatever, but that level is, I think, actually encouraged because it does provide interaction with real problems. I've never been called a sellout, but lots of other bad things. So.
I think you got to strike a balance. If the projects that even in your more junior times, if you can have those projects inform your research somehow, I think it's okay. I think most universities would look at that favorably. Mm-hmm. But if you just work to make money on the side, that's kind of dangerous.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because consulting collaboration can take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And
Okay. Let's go back to the audience for a question or two. There's a question up front.
I have a question for Professor Banks and then a question for you. So you're probably the first person that's touched upon data engineering.
yes.
Which is actually intense because 80% of the time data scientists are spending on data wrangling, ingestion of data, and making sure data is of good quality to use in the algorithms and the models. So my question to all of you, specifically to you, is do you train your data scientists to also be data engineers further? Are you mandating that data engineering be a part of the data science curriculum? Because in the industry, when we hire them, we realize they don't know the skills of how to handle large volumes of data, and we have to teach them.
That is a battle I'm fighting with my department right now. Faculty like to teach things in depth. I think that data engineers, data scientists, people who are going off into industry need to be shallow but broad. So I am encouraging people to teach smorgasbord courses in which you, when I got my PhD, I had to take 3 courses in design of experiments, culminating in partially balanced incomplete block designs with K-associate classes, an area that I have never used. North Carolina State still puts on its qualifying exams questions about expected mean squares from analysis of variance, which is antique. We don't do that anymore. We have software that does that for us. I would like to have a course in which you spend 2.5 weeks on experimental design. You take them up through fractional factorials. You take it up through maybe G and D optimality, so that they're at least 2 different kinds. And then when they go out into the world, they get a job at Google. Google is running online experiments all the time, as I mentioned. They can know the vocabulary to realize this is a designed experiment. I need to read up on partially balanced incomplete block designs with K-associate classes and multi-armed bandits in order to be able to solve this problem. But my colleagues don't see it that way, and so I have gone off-road in my graduate courses and teach what I think the students need to learn as opposed to what the department thinks they need.
And you had one more question?
Well, this one was for you.
Oh boy.
So actually linking with what David spoke about, recommender systems. We use it all the time in financial services, asset and wealth management, for asset allocation, for recommending stock picks, and things like that. So do you see ChatGPT changing some of the A/B testing models and the content generation and all of that, and adding that in conjunction with the recommendation system for collaborative filtering? Do you see any of that impacting what you do?
ChatGPT is going to change everything in the financial world. And you can have, I work on the sell side, and I work with a number of analysts who write reports. Many of the reports can be written by ChatGPT, or very similar reports can be written by ChatGPT. And you can teach or train these models to become more and more sophisticated, right? It depends on how what you train them on and how you refine them. So the financial industry will look incredibly different in another 3, 4, or 5 years, right? And the evolution will happen quickly. We have a number of calls with experts and so on and so forth, but the one thing you have to remember is that the banking and the financial industry, as well as the legal industry, has a lot of regulation. And that regulation, when you have an issue about explainability, right, that will slow down the process. And so what I scratch my head at a couple times is there is a non-regulated part of the financial industry. Is that going to take off, and will that influence how regulation maybe become more lax and create certain systemic risk or issues? But overall, ChatGPT will change everything for the better, and it'll make the capital markets, I would say, more efficient, more effective and more efficient. And it can help people find the optimal solution or optimal result. We'll have to worry about a number of other issues. Earlier today, there was talk about disinformation and fraudulent activity, and one of the things I also see in finance is the technology is going very, very quickly, but the security is not keeping up with the technology, and the ability to quote unquote recreate someone else is quite high. I'll just give you a very quick example. In my family, what had happened probably within the last 6 months, my parents got a phone call from my oldest son, or who they thought was my oldest son, claiming he was arrested for driving drunk, which he was not, and the voice sounded exactly like him. The lingo and the terms that he used was exactly like my son. My parents are not, I've never seen them fall for any scam in my entire life. They almost gave $10,000 over to a nefarious player because it was so convincing. And so what I'm trying to say very ineloquently is the other thing that we have to worry about is privacy issues. we have to worry about fraud, and we have to have security measures that increase dramatically, because the ability to, quote unquote, replicate fraud or replicate somebody's and steal their financial information is increasing. That bar is increasingly lower and lower and lower. But to answer your question, it will change everything, and the financial industry will look very, very different in 2, 3, 4, 5 years than it does today.
I think that what you've just said and asked about relates to an earlier question about whether we need more regulation or less, freedom versus regulation. And when I look at things like the amount of debt, student debt, for example, but also credit card debt, it's the result of, in some sense, non-regulation. And I think the recent regulation with financial planning requiring, fiduciary responsibility has really improved that area. So how it needs to roll out without restricting freedom of innovation and new areas is, I think, the challenge. But there's no doubt people need protection from themselves. I mean, I think of gambling and credit card debt kind of hand in hand. People are vulnerable to it, and can we protect them from themselves? I'm not sure.
Well, actually, I want to go back to the audience, but you hit on something that I wanted to talk about, and I forgot. If you look at another area, which is gambling is now becoming prevalent, and online gambling is now prevalent. You can bet on any single game at any single point in time, tons and tons of information. Is that something that you would work with, or is that a project you would work on, knowing that there are people who have quote-unquote addiction, and you're helping to feed that addiction? Well, that's not fair, but it's an area that's ripe for abuse, and an area where maybe fiduciary responsibilities might come into play.
It's a public policy issue. I mean, in our county, in central Pennsylvania, there's an attempt to open a gambling parlor, a casino, and it's in the court case. It's in the courts, and it's up to the voters. And is it an ethical issue? I mean, those of us who understand statistics realize putting more money into gambling than what you enjoy spending.
Right.
But if you're doing it because you want the windfall, you're only moving on a path to ruin. Right. there's no justification at that level.
It's very unusual, and I don't want to get bogged down in the question, but I will point out that a lot of state lotteries initially were saying, hey, I forget if it was half the proceeds would go to education, and now that's over the years shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, right? But again, I don't want to get bogged down with that. Let's go back to the audience and see if there are a few more questions before we end up. We have about 5 minutes left. George, here we go. I mean, Ed, sorry.
I just couldn't help, because you mentioned lotteries. Don't you think lotteries that we have are just so terribly unethical? What's really happening? We love it, because it's supporting this and that, but you're robbing poor people, and it's just a little bit, but it's just terrible. What do you think?
I think it's a tax on the underclass and people who are not as well educated or understanding of the odds and probabilities. And so you have the government in many cases taking advantage of that, which is odd, because the government also talks about inequities, and you're creating not quite an equity, but you're taking advantage of a situation that's perhaps you shouldn't be doing, and you should know better.
And yet you guys are sort of talking about regulation, because regulation can save us. But look what they're doing. I mean, I don't trust the government at all.
I'm not really sure how to respond to that one. But
Ed, I agree that lotteries are terribly unfair. They're essentially a tax on the poor and the stupid. But we have much bigger issues to worry about. The world has got major problems. I mentioned earlier that we're going to go through severe economic dislocation as large language models come to play, as autonomous vehicles come to play, as automated checkouts come into play. People are going to lose their jobs. How do we ethically reapportion the benefits from autonomous vehicles to everybody? And that's a conversation that is not happening.
We've seen this show before, right? I mean,
Not to the degree.
New industries.
New industries cause creative destruction. That's happened many times before, but I think we're in a situation now where we're going to see a lot more creative destruction than we've ever seen before. I got a ride from my Uber driver, told me that he was getting GPT-4 to organize his divorce papers. And he couldn't afford a lawyer to actually put together all the paperwork, but he could afford a half hour of a lawyer's time to look over the GPT-4's paperwork. And according to the Uber driver, the lawyer said, this is all great, you can file it. And so this is a level of creative destruction that we have not seen before. And I always think we should have a conversation about ethical economies, but it's going to become an issue for everybody soon.
How about statisticians?
Are you familiar with Lee Wilkinson's second opinion? Lee Wilkinson, statistician, recently died. He wrote software for a program called a second opinion, which would do an automated analysis of data and produce a written report that explains why it reached the conclusion it did. You didn't want to rely on it 100%, but it gave you outlier tests, it gave you regression diagnostics, it gave you tests for correlated residuals. It did a lot of things well. And it didn't put us out of business, but it's an existence proof that, yes, a lot of what we do can be automated.
For whatever it's worth, I'm going to side with Ed on this one. This could be the industrial revolution of technology, and there could be some displacement, but I think it will always, we've seen this movie before, and there'll be some situations that will be a little bit more difficult, but ultimately I think it will be better for society and better for all. And as always, we'll always need to figure out how to, the government and private institutions will figure out how to either retrain or repurpose or take in some of the people who are displaced.
You're an optimist?
I am.
Yeah, I'm an optimist also. I remember when statistical software first came out. That's going to put statisticians out of business. I think what happened is way more statisticians were needed. But right now with ChatGPT, I think accountants are worried that, my goodness, once it gets trained, it can do accounting, and all those accountants will be looking for jobs. Somehow, I have the feeling that when things like that happen, government will pass new regulations, accounting regulations, that will make it ever yet more complex, and we'll need, a whole nother army of accountants to kind of beat the tax code, which is what most of them are doing these days. So I'm not ready to declare doom yet. Remember, our unemployment rate at the moment is about 3%. So I don't think Ubers or automatic checkouts are going to solve the problem. Or going to create armies of unemployed people, David. So,
Okay.
We'll leave that question to be continued.
okay, solve it next week.
I think Ed has the microphone again.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I was just going to echo what Jim was saying, but somebody said the other day that you shouldn't worry about being replaced by ChatGPT. You should be worried about being replaced by somebody who knows how to use ChatGPT.
That's right. That's right.
You're correct.
Yep.
All right, we just have another minute or two, so we have time for another question, unless we're good. Going one. Alan, do you have a question, or we're good? Okay. All right, gentlemen, thank you for the time. Thank you for the questions.